everyone, and welcome back to another video, or welcome if you are new to my channel. Today I've got another true crime case for you. This is absolutely insane. It's one of the craziest cases I think I've ever heard in terms of why these events happened and what actually did happen. I mean, I say one of the craziest, but I feel like I could say that about every single case I come across, but this is truly bizarre. There's so many twists and turns. I don't know how I'm going to title this video, as I don't want to give it away, and I don't think I'm going to give a little introduction to it. I think I'm just going to dive in and then the story can unfold. So, this story is about a pair of identical twins that come from Sweden, and their names are Sabina and Ursula Eriksson, and they were both born on the 3rd of November 1967. But they both moved away from Sweden. It's unsure at what ages they moved, but Ursula moved to the United States and Sabina moved to Ireland. And in May of 2008, both now 40 years old, Ursula decides to go and visit her sister in Ireland. So Ursula arrives in Ireland to visit her sister, and she is currently living with her partner at the time and her 2 children. And things get crazy immediately, because on that first night of her visit, the twins decide to just up and leave without telling anybody where they're going. Sabina doesn't tell her partner or her children that she's going somewhere. The 2 of them just get up, go and catch a ferry from Ireland to Liverpool. And when they arrive in Liverpool the next morning at about 8:30, and this is now Saturday, May 17th of 2008, they immediately go to a police station where Sabina files a report saying that she's gotten into a fight with her partner the night before, and she was concerned about the safety of her children that are back in Ireland. Now, this is kind of odd to begin with anyway, because one, why would you not just go to like your local police station to report something like this? You're in Ireland, there's plenty of police stations they could go to report domestic violence or abuse happening in the home. You know, there was no need to jump on a ferry and go to Liverpool to do this. And secondly, if you're worried about your children with your partner, why would you leave them alone with him? If you're worried about their safety, why did you not bring them with you? So immediately, this is kind of odd behaviour, and the police are like, okay, we'll look into this for you. But the twins don't stick around to talk more to the police or find out how this investigation is going to go. They're on the move again. This time they head to a coach station where they board a National Express coach at 11:30 AM that's going to London. And again, no one knows why they're travelling to London, they just do. Maybe it was meant to be a sightseeing trip because her sister's come over from the United States. That was the thought that I had, but no one knows why they went anywhere, because they didn't tell anybody. So they're on this coach travelling down the M6 motorway. If you're American, I think you use the term freeway or highway. So that's what this is, that's what a motorway is. In the UK, it's one of the busiest motorways we have. There's always a huge number of cars and lots of so that the other passengers are starting to get uncomfortable, and they feel quite concerned about their behaviour. So the passengers tell the driver that there are two twins on board behaving erratically, and it's making everyone feel uneasy. Now, I'm not entirely sure what kind of behaviour they were exhibiting, but whatever it was making other people feel so uncomfortable that they were reporting it to the driver. So now that the driver has been informed, he starts to keep an eye on them in his rearview mirror, and he notices that the twins are clutching their bags very tightly to them, almost like hugging them close to their bodies. So, because of the reports of their bizarre behaviour, making people feel uncomfortable, and now he's seeing them clutching their bags super tightly, rather than putting them in the overhead compartments like you would with luggage, because these weren't like small handbags. Apparently they were quite big bags, and so this is the kind of coach where there are luggage compartments, and most people would use those, but they were not. So the driver is now a bit concerned that maybe there's something in their bags, maybe weapons of some kind, perhaps drugs, or the worst, a bomb. I'm sure that's something that all vehicle operators are told to be very aware of. So the driver decides to stop at the next service station so that he can speak to the twins and make sure everything is safe and okay. So he ends up pulling over into Kiel services, which is still about 3 hours away from London, and this was an unscheduled stop. Usually when you take a long coach journey such as this, there are designated stops along the way, and this wasn't one of them. So, that just goes to show how concerned everyone was about the twins and their behaviour, that a coach decided to make an unscheduled stop in an undesignated location. So when they get to the service station, the driver turns the coach off and approaches the twins and asks if he could check their bags, but they say no, absolutely not. So because of the fact that he's had multiple passengers tell him that they're behaving weirdly, and now they're not allowing him to search their bags, this is making the driver feel uncomfortable about having them on his coach, because he's just thinking about the safety of all his passengers. So he tells them that they need to get off the coach if they don't want to cooperate. They can no longer continue their journey with him. So they get off and he leaves the twins at Kiel services. Now the manager of the service station sees the twins on CCTV and sees that they're again acting very bizarrely. So the manager calls the police about them. I'm not sure if the coach driver went and spoke to the manager of the services about the twins, but either way, the manager called the police. So the police turn up and talk to Sabina and Ursula, and the police didn't deem them to be concerning or think that there was anything wrong, so they head on their way and leave the twins at the service station. And if things weren't bizarre enough, up until now, at this point, the twins start walking down the central reservation of the M6. Yes, down the middle of one of the busiest motorways in the UK that has 3 lanes either side, with a ton of traffic doing speeds of up to 70 miles an hour. Well, by law 70 miles an hour, but I'm sure there are people doing more than that. I don't even know how they managed to get onto the central reservation this is akin to something like, oh gosh, I used to watch some of the American cop shows and I can't even remember their names, but hopefully you know the kind of show I mean. You know, it's like a reality show where they follow cops on duty and it kind of gets a bit dramatized, you know, that kind of thing. So that was being filmed, and there's footage of everything that's about to go down online that you can watch. It's absolutely wild. So the police have been notified. They're walking down the middle of the M6 and they're on their way to the twins, when all of a sudden Sabina climbs over the metal barrier and runs out into the road, into oncoming traffic, and her sister quickly follows suit, which obviously causes chaos on the road because they've just run out onto the motorway where vehicles are doing high speeds, and so cars are slamming on their brakes, they're swerving to make sure they don't hit them, and Sabina actually gets hit by a car, but unbelievably she just gets up and continues to make her way over to the side of the road as if nothing had happened. She didn't seem fazed or hurt by having just been hit by a car, so I'm assuming it mustn't have been that bad. Like, maybe she just got clipped by the car rather than actually properly hit, but she seemed fine. So again, the police have been notified that now one of them has been hit by a car, and they are expecting some sort of casualty as they arrive on the scene. But instead, when they get there, they find both twins standing in the hard shoulder, and the hard shoulder is like an emergency lane, so it only gets used, you know, if your car breaks down and you pull over into it, or if there's an accident or roadworks and authorities need to use it as an extra lane, they'll open it up, but other than that, you're not meant to drive in the hard shoulder. But this is where the twins were standing, and they seemed perfectly fine, like they were just stood there as if nothing had happened, super chill, and no traffic had built up, all the cars were just continuing to flow as usual. So it seems like the car that hit Sabina just carried on, they didn't stop. So again, I'm assuming the hit must have been a very minor thing, which is lucky for the motorway. She must have perhaps got hit in the slow lane, but even the slow lane isn't slow. But yeah, she got lucky. But anyway, now the cops are there, and also a TV crew from Motorway Cops has come with them because, as I said, they were filming the show at the time, and this is fairly big news. There's two twins walking down the middle of the M6 and running into the road, so they are also present. And little did they know that things are about to get even crazier, and they're going to have a big story on their hands. So the police are talking to Sabina and Ursula, and they're a bit baffled by the fact that Sabina seems perfectly fine after just being hit by a car. She didn't appear shaken or anxious. They were just stood there smoking a cigarette and chatting to the cops as if nothing's happened. And the next thing you know, Ursula runs back into the road after having just been stood there talking to the cops quite normally. She just runs into the road again, into oncoming traffic. And unfortunately for Ursula, this time she runs straight into a huge lorry or truck. I think you might call them semi-trucks in America, but like, you know, the big 18-wheeler lorries, trucks on the road. She gets hit by one of these and gets dragged under the wheels. But miraculously, she doesn't die, but she does get very badly injured. Her legs are absolutely crushed. And it doesn't end there. Oh no, because seconds after Ursula runs into the road, Sabina quickly does the same thing and gets hit by a car. And this time, it's not just a minor hit. She gets thrown up into the air, lands on the ground, and has completely smashed in the windscreen of this car. So obviously the police are just dumbfounded as to what's just happened, because, you know, one minute they're talking to these twins quite calmly, and the next both of them have run into the road and been hit by vehicles. So now they're trying to just quickly react and calm this crazy situation. So some of them are attempting to stop the flow of traffic, and the others go and tend to Ursula, whose legs have been crushed by the lorry, because she's going to need some urgent attention. One of the police officers at the scene described her legs as having exploded and said that there were bones protruding out of her legs, so she was really messed up by this. But amazingly, she was still conscious. I can't imagine the amount of pain she must have been in, and like, surely that would make you pass out. I don't know, but you wouldn't know she was in pain, because as the police started to tend to her, you know, you would think that someone who's just been hit by a truck would at least be phasing in and out of consciousness and just be like dazed and out of it, but she wasn't. She was conscious, and she became confrontational with the police. She starts shouting and swearing at them, telling them to F off, and the police are just trying to calm her down and explain that she's just sustained major injuries and needs to try and stay still, because at one point she even tries to get up, almost as if she's not aware of the fact that she can't use her legs. And in the footage of all of this craziness happening, you can hear Ursula shout, "Call the police," and the police are saying to her, "We are the police." So she's obviously in a state of shock and very confused, but to be honest, it seems as if she's been confused all day. So whilst all this is going on with Ursula, Sabina is also being seen to by other officers, and she too is miraculously conscious after being hit by a car. And not only that, she didn't have any signs of injuries on her body. She appears okay and fairly calm. She's just lying on the ground with her eyes closed, but she's breathing, when all of a sudden Ursula shouts over to Sabina, "They're going to take our organs." Yeah, and this seemed to awaken Sabina, because she jumps up from the ground and tries to run away. And now obviously the police are very worried about her possibly having internal injuries, so a policewoman goes after her and tries to restrain her and calm her down, but Sabina punches her in the face, hops over the central reservation, and proceeds to run across the other side of the motorway, where there are still vehicles travelling at 70 miles an hour. I mean, what on earth is going on? Who does she think she is, Wonder Woman? How on earth can she be hit by a car, be absolutely fine, and just continue running and jumping as if nothing has happened? It's crazy. Luckily, she wasn't hit again as she ran across the other side of the motorway, but cars were still having to swerve to miss her. Police officers stop traffic and follow Sabina onto the other side of the road and try to restrain her again, but she's not having any of it. She starts putting up her fists as if she's ready to fight them. And the police are just repeating to her, "Calm down, please calm down, we're here to help you." But Sabina isn't listening and continues being aggressive, to the point where the police were unable to said that Sabina was showing almost superhuman-like strength. And she's not a particularly big woman, she's actually very slim. She's fairly tall, but she's not really taller than any of the cops that were there. So it's very weird that it took so many people to be able to restrain her, considering she's just been hit by 2 different cars at 2 different points in time, and the second car sustained a lot of damage from the impact with her. To be honest, at this point it kind of seems like the car got more damage than her body did, which is crazy. So the police are wondering what the hell is going on with these twins. They're both being aggressive despite having been hit by vehicles, and one of them has crushed legs, and they don't seem to be registering any pain. So naturally they start to wonder if they're high on something. They also wonder if the twins might have some kind of unaliving pact between them that they're carrying out. One police officer mentions that head injuries can sometimes cause bizarre behaviour, so perhaps that's what was going on here, because they've both been knocked down. So maybe a brain injury has happened and has allowed them to behave this way, even though they've had bizarre behaviour all up until getting hit anyway. Eventually ambulances turn up to treat the twins, and they sedate Sabina because she's just out of control, and Ursula ends up getting picked up by an air ambulance because her injuries were so severe that she needed to get taken to a specialist hospital to get treatment, whereas Sabina was just taken to the nearest hospital because she didn't appear to have any serious injuries. So they're both taken to hospital, and of course Ursula's injuries are just horrendous, and she has a long recovery ahead of her. However, Sabina only ended up staying in hospital for 5 hours because after her examination it was found that she had no injuries, no internal injuries, no nothing, which is just unbelievable after getting hit by a car. And when you see the impact she made on the car, you would think she had something going on. But after 5 hours they said that she was free to go, and they just discharged her, which is a bit bad really. Like, they should have kept her in overnight for observation, because I mean, she could have concussion and she may end up feeling worse later on, so I feel like they should have kept her in overnight, but they didn't, and they just let her go. And so once she's discharged from hospital, she's then taken into police custody, and they take her to the station. And once she's there, her personality appears to be very different from what they observed earlier that day. Now she's very calm, she's very friendly, and she's having a good old chat with all the police officers. It's a stark difference to what they had experienced with her earlier. So the police ask Sabina about what had happened earlier that day, why her and her sister ran out onto the road, but she never really gave an answer. She'd kind of just kept deflecting, and the police noticed that the entire time they were talking to her, she never mentioned her sister Ursula. She didn't ask any questions about how she is, how she's doing, nothing. It's almost like she didn't have any recollection of what had happened. And apparently both Sabina and Ursula were tested for any substances in their system, and the results came back as clean for both of them, which I find difficult to believe. I wonder if that's even true, that they did a test, because I find it really hard to believe that they're not on something. How can you get hit by a car and not register any pain? How can you get hit by a car, jump up and start fighting? And apparently the sheer strength that Sabina had, it seems like a substance would have something to do with that. She pleads guilty to these charges and is sentenced to only 1 day in prison, which she's already served, so she was just released. And what's also quite shocking about all of this is that the whole time she's in custody and was at the hospital beforehand, she didn't receive a psychological evaluation, which I think really needed to have been done considering the circumstances, and especially once they apparently found no substances in her system. You would think that that would be the next port of call to go through with some kind of psychological or psychiatric evaluation. And also especially if they thought they had this pact between them, but they didn't do that. And I think there's a bit of poor work done here by the emergency services, to be honest. So after Sabina was released from custody, she was basically left to her own devices. She doesn't really know where she is, and no one asked her if she knew where she could go, if she had a friend she could stay with. She wasn't offered any help. They just let her go on her own, which again, I think that's quite poor. So Sabina's out wandering the streets on her own when at about 7 p.m. she comes across a man named Glenn Hollinshead and his friend Peter. They were walking back from the pub and Glenn had his dog with him. So Sabina approaches and goes, "Oh, you've got a nice dog," and starts chatting to Glenn and Peter. She ends up telling them that she doesn't know where she is and that she's trying to find her sister, who is in a hospital somewhere. I'm not sure if authorities told her the name of the hospital that her sister was in and she's maybe forgotten it, or maybe they never told her. You would hope that they did. But she didn't appear to know where her sister was. Now, Glenn Hollinshead was 54 years old, and he was a trained paramedic, and he used to work in the RAF, and he was known for being very kind. He was the kind of man that would help anyone if they needed it. So he can see that Sabina is in need of help, and he says to her that she's welcome to come back to his house and they can figure things out from there. He said that he has a brother that works in the local hospital, so maybe he can talk to him and help her locate her sister. So Sabina says yes, that would be helpful, and all three of them go back to Glenn's house. Back at the house, they're chatting, they're having a few drinks, and getting along really well. Sabina's being very personable and friendly with them. However, when Glenn's friend Peter starts asking Sabina about Ursula, Sabina's energy changes. She becomes almost defensive and more closed off, and she starts displaying signs of paranoia. She would go up to the window and look through the blinds, checking both ways down the road, and then quickly come away from the window as if she'd either been seen or she'd seen something. So now her behaviour's a bit more erratic again. At one point, Sabina offered Glenn and Peter a cigarette and they both accepted, but when they put them in their mouths and were about to light them, Sabina quickly snatched them back out of their mouths again and said, "What are you doing? They could be poisoned." Very bizarre, because Sabina has been smoking cigarettes from this packet all night, so she knows they're not poisoned. So Sabina would keep switching back and forth between this really weird, bizarre, paranoid behaviour and then go back to being really friendly and chatty. And so Peter started to become suspicious of her because, he's thinking, why is she acting so paranoid? Is she on the run from something? Is she hiding something? Why does she keep going to look out the window? But Glenn kept telling Peter not to worry and that everything will be fine. Then Glenn offered for Sabina to stay at his house for the night because it was getting sorted out, and Glenn would give his brother a call to try and locate Ursula. By 7:40 p.m, Sabina is still at Glenn's house, and Glenn is preparing dinner for them. And it was at this point that Glenn realised he was out of tea bags, so he quickly popped over to his neighbour to ask if he could borrow some. His neighbour was on his driveway washing his car when he asked, so the neighbour says, "Sure, I'll go and get some." So he goes into his house, comes back out with the tea bags, gives them to Glenn, and Glenn goes home again, and the neighbour continues to wash his car. And just minutes later, Glenn comes stumbling back out of his house, shouting, "She stabbed me! She stabbed me!" The neighbour is in complete shock because only a few moments ago Glenn was absolutely fine, and now he's in front of him with blood pouring from him, and he collapses onto the floor. So the neighbour dials 999 straight away, but sadly, by the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. Glenn had passed away after suffering 5 stab wounds at the hands of Sabina. So sad. And his last words to his neighbour were, "Please take care of my dog." Just unbelievable. All he was doing was trying to help a young woman in trouble, and this is how his life ends. It's so sad. So whilst all of this is going on with the neighbour and calling 999, Sabina, she's fled. She's ran off down the street, but she does get picked up on CCTV, and apparently she's running along, hitting herself in the head with a hammer. Do you see what I mean about this case being absolutely crazy and bizarre? So someone that drives past Sabina sees her doing this to herself, and that she's got blood coming from her head, so they pull over and try to wrestle the hammer out of her hand to stop her from hurting herself. But Sabina is clearly not in her right mind, and she doesn't take to this act of kindness. Instead, she again gets defensive and aggressive, pulls a roof tile from her pocket. Where the hell has she got a roof tile from? I guess from Glenn's garden or something, and smashes the driver over the head with it. So the driver obviously staggers back, and Sabina carries on running. When 2 paramedics arrive at the scene for Glenn, they chase after Sabina, and eventually Sabina reaches a bridge. She stops, looks around, and then looks over the bridge. Now this bridge is 40 foot high, and it goes over the A50, which isn't a motorway, but it's still a very busy main road with lots of vehicles doing high speeds. And if you haven't guessed it, yes, Sabina jumps off the bridge, and as she lands, she sustains 2 broken ankles and a fractured skull, but still survives the fall into oncoming traffic from a 40-foot bridge. This is just mental. Like, it's almost as if the part of the brain that recognises danger just is not active. So again, Sabina is taken to hospital, and once she has eventually recovered from her injuries after quite some time, she's then taken into custody again, and now she gets charged with murder. And throughout the police interview, Sabina didn't answer anything. Every question, she just said, "No comment." So the police weren't able to even figure out what happened or why she killed Glenn, because she was not cooperating. Both the defense and the prosecution agreed that at the time of the murder, Sabine was insane. She was examined by psychiatrists to kind of figure out what was going on, and Ursula was as well, because they wanted to know what was going on with her too, even though she hadn't killed someone. They had both displayed erratic behaviour over the past couple of days. And it was found that Sabina and Ursula were suffering from a condition called folie à deux. Excuse my French, I'm not good at it, but it basically means shared psychotic disorder, where delusions are transmitted from a primary psychotic individual to a passive secondary person, often within close, isolated relationships. Symptoms include shared paranoid or persecutory delusions, often treated by separating the individuals and using antipsychotics. So in this case, it was believed that Ursula was the one that was originally suffering from some kind of psychosis, and then she transferred this onto Sabina. Now, I'd never heard of this before, but my immediate reaction is, how can that even happen? Surely the second person must also have some kind of underlying mental health issue in order to have psychosis transferred onto them. I can't imagine a fully sane person becoming psychotic just because their sibling is in psychosis. Do you know what I'm saying? But I don't know, maybe I'm not understanding it correctly. But it's thought that both Sabina and Ursula, because they're twins, they had a predisposition to be able to suffer from this. Other psychiatrists thought that Sabina could be suffering from acute polymorphic syndrome, which is a rare, severe mental illness characterized by the sudden onset of rapidly changing psychotic symptoms, including hallucinations, delusions, and emotional turmoil that alter within hours or days. Symptoms usually develop within 48 hours to 2 weeks, often following severe stress, and typically resolve quite quickly. So I guess that kind of makes sense for Sabina. Perhaps she was coming from a really terrible situation at home, because obviously they went to the police and reported about her being worried about her children. So maybe that's what happened there. But in the end, Sabina avoided trial by pleading guilty to manslaughter with diminished responsibility, and she was only sentenced to 5 years in prison for murdering Glenn Hollinshead, which doesn't seem like enough, to be honest. Ursula took quite a while to recover from her horrific injuries, but once she did, she returned back to America, and Sabina was released from prison in 2011, and her whereabouts are now unknown. So, given the fact that there are so many unanswered questions with this case and how bizarre it all was, naturally a lot of theories are flying around trying to make sense of their actions. So one theory is that Sabina was fleeing from her abusive partner, which, as I said, that could be very true, given that when they got to Liverpool, that's what they reported straight away. And perhaps Ursula was also fleeing from a bad situation in America. You just never really know. There's also a theory that the twins could have been drug smugglers because of how sketchy they were behaving with their bags on the coach, you know, refusing to have them looked at, not wanting to part with them. And apparently, eventually, their bags did get searched by the authorities, and they had multiple mobile phones in their bags, which is a bit weird. Like, why do you need multiple phones? Unless maybe the abusive stories are true, in which case maybe they had different phones to be able to contact perhaps they got involved in the wrong crowd and people who sell organs on the black market were after them. Which, I know that sounds wild, but selling organs on the black market is actually a real thing. But I would assume that they don't kill people for these organs. I'd assume maybe that they're stealing them from morgues and things like that. I don't know. Maybe that I really don't know, but it is weird, but it's also understandable if they have like mental health issues that she said something kind of crazy like that. And the final theory, again quite conspiracy-like, is that Sabina and Ursula were super soldiers created by MK Ultra. If you haven't heard of MK Ultra before, in a nutshell, really quickly, it was a program carried out by the CIA where they conducted mind control experiments on human subjects using different methods that are kind of torturous, and they would use drugs, and this would kind of create humans to have superhuman abilities almost. So if it was true that they were a part of MK Ultra, it could explain why they had seemingly super strength, why they weren't feeling any pain, and that after running into traffic, Sabina was just ready to fight. It would also explain why we don't really know much about their backgrounds or what happened to them after all of this, if they were a part of this program. But MK Ultra was supposedly only done in the 70s, maybe the 80s, and was then said to have ceased being active, so I doubt this is the answer, but you never know. You'll have to let me know what you make of this. I think it's probably most likely that they both suffer from severe mental illness that had never been diagnosed before, that had gone unchecked and untreated for a very long time. And yeah, for whatever reason, they both lost it together at the same